Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jaya Shri Krishna Caitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Vishnu Slavana Sichki Bhakti. That's all I got. That's all I got. So, is this year 3 or 4?
What?
The course. Of the 12-year course? This is the 3rd year or the 4th year?
I think
The 3rd.
I'm not sure.
Welcome to the 3rd year of our course. Or perhaps the 4th year. I think it's also the 3rd. So, Pandava Mashai probably already went over all of this morning. Maybe. Okay. The way this course was designed. So many people, when they study Shastra, right, and even the way that Srila Prabhupada established it, is you have your Bhakti Shastri books, which is Bhagavad Gita, Sri Upanishad, Upadeshamrita, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And then you have your Bhakti Vaibhav, first 6 cantos of Bhagavatam, then Bhakti Vedanta, then 7 through 12, and then Bhakti Sarvabhauma, Caitanya Siksamrita. And this is a very good way to study Shastra. What we found about 18 years ago, while going through the course, is when we started studying Srimad Bhagavatam, right after studying Bhagavad Gita, the questions that were coming up during the discussion were what I like to call Bhagavad Gita level doubts. So Bhagavad Gita, I'm sure we've all read and appreciate Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is about Arjuna, for our benefit, expressing many different doubts on whether or not he should take Krishna's advice and fight, right? And so, of course, he gives all sorts of different doubts, again, for our benefit. What is that sound? Are those birds?
I think there's something in the air conditioner. Something is eating in the...
Okay. Michelle, all right, Krishna. Yeah, something's eating the air conditioner. Okay.
It's alive.
No problem. So, after we're finished reading Bhagavad Gita, we should be convinced, beyond a doubt, that we should surrender to Krishna. Then when we're studying Srimad Bhagavatam, we're to understand how to surrender to Krishna, right? Who is Krishna, and how does he want us to actually behave? How do we get the instructions that Arjuna got, right? And so when we were running the course about 18 years ago, and we started Bhagavatam, and we realized we're getting these questions that are actually answered in Bhagavad Gita, we realized that it's beneficial to actually study the Bhagavad Gita, these Bhakti Shastras, multiple times to get a proper, full understanding of what's there. That way, when we actually go to study Srimad Bhagavatam, all of the other doubts have already been resolved, right? And so we talked about this last year when we were doing the thematic study. So first we did the systematic study, then we were doing the thematic study. And so in the systematic study, we're so fortunate that Srila Prabhupada has presented this Vedic literature to us in our language, right? So he understood the people at the time, and he spoke to us in language that we would easily understand, right? The language of the Vedas it's the same message that Srila Prabhupada delivered, but it's in a very specific formula. And we learn what that formula is when we actually study Sri Caitanya Siksamrita, right? But we don't want to have to wait to go all the way through to then understand what is the language of the Vedas, to then say, oh, now I should go back and do it again, which is okay to do. I've done that. It's okay to do it that way. But what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has done in these books that we're going to study in the afternoon is he's presented in a very concise way what the language of the Vedas is. And the books we covered last year did the same thing with Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Sri Bhakti Loka and Sri Tattva Sutra, right. So what he does is, by the help, and we'll see here, by the help of Lord Chaitanya's instructions and Sri Caitanya Siksamrita to Sanatana Goswami, he shows us how to actually understand what the Vedas is saying without being distracted by anything else. And even Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says that the Vedas can be distracting. There are some flowery language that's meant to attract those who aren't quite ready to surrender, to attract them enough to at least live their lives in a semi-respectable way, to gradually become purified. But if we don't understand that, then we can become distracted while thinking, oh, actually, I'm on the proper path. And then we may try to figure out why, if I'm on the proper path, am I not making a rapid advancement, right? So knowing the language of the Vedas, how it's presented, is highly beneficial for all of us so that we can really get to the point. Now, I mentioned that Srila Prabhupada, he presented this to us in our language. He didn't leave anything out. Everything is there. In fact, once we go through and study all of these books, we start understanding that when we're reading through the purports of Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada is actually speaking in terms of the Vedas. He's just using our language, right? So I'm sure on the first year, you were here the first year, yeah? For part of it. You were here the first year. So anytime in the purports, when I was reading, either Sambandha, Abhideya, or Prayojana were mentioned, I would say, what does that sound like? And eventually everyone caught on, right? Remember? Right. So Srila Prabhupada, he did present that to us, just not necessarily in the same words. Yes?
Please explain shortly what is Sambandha.
I'm about to, yes, thank you. So the Padma Purana tells us, so first before we get to Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana, because that's three things. First we're going to get to two things, right? And it almost sounds like one. So the Padma Purana says that the purpose of the entire Vedas is for us to understand to always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna, right? Two things very simple. But that can become problematic. Can anyone tell me an example of someone who's always thought of Krishna and never forgotten him, but not in a favorable way, in an inimical way? Kamsa. And?
Hiranyakashipu.
Sure. And?
Ravana.
Did you say one?
Ravana.
And? So many. Shishupal, right? So many examples of this. So it's not enough for us to just understand that we should always think of Krishna and never forget him. We have to understand what is the favorable way to always think of Krishna and to never forget him. Because if we fail to give up our self-centric nature, then even if we are thinking of Krishna, even if we're referring to the Shastras to think of Krishna's pastimes, if we still have ourselves in the center as the controller or the enjoyer, we're not actually going to make spiritual advancement, right? So, in Lord Chaitanya's talks with Sanatana Goswami, in the Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya also refers to the Puranas when he says that all of the Vedas deals with three topics: Sambandha, Abhideya, Prayojana. If you're outside of that realm, you're not actually discussing the Vedas, right? And the most common example is the Mayavadis, right? They will always quote Shastra. They love doing it. But they're not referring to Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So now we're going to define what these terms are. This is very important to understand. Does anyone want to? What's Sambandha?
No, please.
No, please. No, please.
But you are a student, you should know.
You know what Sambandha is.
Yeah, I know it.
Give it to me. Come on, please. I beg you.
It's our relationship.
Relationship, right.
Between Krishna, this material world, and us.
Right. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada defines knowledge as knowing yourself and the difference between spirit and matter and the controller and, the controller and source of both, right? So we have to understand the relationship. That's the first very important thing. If we don't understand our relationship between us and Krishna, always thinking of Krishna and never forgetting him, that may not work properly, right? Examples, Shishupal, Kamsa, right? So that's the first thing we have to do. And we see with anything that we do, if we don't understand the relationship, we can't actually make something work. So what is something that you do on a daily basis?
For remembering
Anything. No, just in general. What is something that you just do every day?
Eating.
Eating.
Brushing
Huh?
my teeth or something.
Brushing your teeth. Okay. So brushing your teeth. You have a toothbrush. You have toothpaste. Do you use toothpaste?
Yeah.
I don't use toothpaste, actually. I use a special kind of toothbrush.
Yeah,
So there's toothbrush, there's toothpaste, there's water,
Yeah.
right? There's the sink. There's where you don't just spit on the floor. So we have to know the relationships between these things. Even if we have all of the right things, we go to the store and we say, give me the best toothbrush, give me the best toothpaste, But if we don't understand the relationships between them, if we're using the other end of the toothbrush, not the brush end, and we're just kind of sticking it in our mouth or in our nose or in our ear, then we don't understand actually what the tools are for. So if we don't understand the relationship, we can't understand the Vedas, and we can't understand Krishna. All right, so relationship, that's the first thing, that's Sambandha. Then we're going to skip to the last one, Prayojana. Prayojana means, Ishwar Chandra, the goal, right? So if we understand what our relationship is, we should also understand what our goal is. What are we aspiring to do? Here's where we are now, here's where we want to go. So we can think of the Vedas like a map, right? We have to find out, first of all, where we are on the map, right? That's our relationship to everything else. Then we have to figure out, okay, where do I want to go? Okay, here it is, that's the Prayojana. And then the middle one, Abhideya, Tulsi Prabhu.
The process.
The process. So I already know who I am and what my relationship is to everything, especially the goal. I understand where the goal is. Now I need to know how to get from where I am to where I want to go. That's Abhideya, right? So that's the process. And Lord Caitanya explained to Srila Sanatana Goswami that if you're discussing the Vedas and you're not referring to these three things, Hare Krishna, Radha Krishna, Prabhu Ki Jai, if you're not explaining the Vedas or discussing the Vedas in the context of these three things, you're not actually talking about the Vedas, right? And so we also saw with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he was actually instructing Lord Chaitanya. He had the audacity to do such things. He saw himself as a superior and he wanted to educate this poor young sannyasi in Vedanta. And so he spoke for 7 days? 7 days on Vedanta, non-stop. And Lord Chaitanya just sat there, like looking at him, not giving any sort of feedback, whether visual or audible. He's just sitting there listening. And so eventually Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, he's saying, are you understanding anything I'm saying? I'm talking for a week now and you haven't asked any questions, you haven't shown any even little bit of understanding or interest. And is it that you don't understand Vedanta? And Lord Chaitanya, he said, well, no. I understand Vedanta perfectly, but what you're talking about, that's just nonsense. This is ridiculous, right? Because he wasn't referring to Sambandha Abhideya Prayojana. If we don't understand what our relationship is, then none of the rest of it matters, right? We won't know what the goal is because we don't know who we are in relation to that goal. If we think we're equal to Krishna, like the Mayavadis do, or that we're going to become him, then you're already starting out at an extreme disadvantage, even worse of a disadvantage than just being a materialist, right? Because if we're materialists, then we're following the materialistic path. Okay, that's what we're supposed to do here in the material world. That's what it's here for. But if we're on what is considered to be a spiritual path, if we're referring to Shastra and we're considering ourselves beings who are on this transcendental path, but we're actually not understanding Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana like the Mayavadis, then it's actually worse, because as the Sri Upanishad mentioned, that ignorance is dangerous, but worse than that is so-called knowledge, right? So it's in the guise of knowledge. It should be knowledge, but you're doing it the wrong way, so it's kind of giving it a bad name, right? That's going to keep doing that. It's a special feature of the last year we went through the thematic study of the books. Now this year, in the afternoon classes, we're going to go through 2 books by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur. The first one is Sri Caitanya Siksamrita. The second one is Jaiva Dharma. And they have very similar themes. They're going to go through this process of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. It's good to go through all 3, because if we just focus on one of them, like say we just focus on Sambandha, establishing what the relationship is, if we don't periodically discuss what the goal is, then what motivation do we have to actually continue to understand? If we don't move on to Abhideya, we understand who we are and we understand our goal, we need to know what the process is, otherwise how do we expect to make an advancement? Some people just focus on the goal, right? There are sahajyas, apasampradayas, who all they focus on is the goal. And they imagine somehow that if they just focus on the goal, somehow magically spontaneous feelings of ecstasy will manifest within themselves, right? And so it's a disadvantage if we're only focusing on one of these 3. We have to understand all 3 of them together. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur very expertly, by referring to Sri Caitanya Charitamrita, gives us Lord Chaitanya's instructions on how to understand the Vedas, as he explained to Srila Sanatana Goswami. So very important piece of work. And the reason we're doing that now before we study Bhagavatam, as I mentioned before, is when we start to understand the language of the Vedas, we can get much more out of it, right? No matter what level we're on, when we're reading Srila Prabhupada's books, we will, if we're sincere, be able to make spiritual advancement. I'm sure at least most of you have had this experience when reading Srila Prabhupada's books a 2nd, 3rd, 4th time. You notice things that you didn't notice before. So, oh, I don't remember that being there. And that's just like what I read here in Srimad Bhagavatam. What we find is, as we go through, Srila Prabhupada, he's always quoting Shastra, but he's not necessarily always giving the reference. He's not always saying, in Srimad Bhagavatam 5:18-12, Prahlad Maharaj says that all the qualities of the demigods become manifest in the hearts of a pure devotee who's engaged in devotional service. He will paraphrase that verse without giving the reference sometimes. And this happens with a lot of verses. So the more we study Srila Prabhupada's books, the more we realize that he's just quoting Shastra constantly. And he's constantly presenting not only Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, just in our language, but he's also presenting it in a very specific way called Panchanga Nyaya, the 5 limbs of logic, which Prabhu, you know all about because you were writing essays. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you recite what they are. But it's a way in which, and I'm not going to go over the whole thing right now, but it's a way in which we can logically present something in a sound way, in an authorized way. So we start with what Krishna is telling us in Shastra, and then we can explain that through logic, and then we can give examples of things that we've had experience of, like before with the toothbrush. So we related that back to Sambandha, because if we don't know the relationship between where this is supposed to go and where I'm supposed to spit and what am I supposed to brush and all that, then the whole thing becomes useless. And so Srila Prabhupada has presented this to us in such a way. Now, if we can start understanding the Vedas according to its own language, then we can appreciate Srila Prabhupada's presentation a whole lot more. Because like I mentioned, in Srila Prabhupada's purports to Bhagavad Gita, he does give instructions from the Bhagavatam. And in the same way, so if you're reading Bhagavad Gita, you can actually get higher instructions than just you should surrender unto Krishna. He's telling you how to surrender unto Krishna also in his purports. And similarly in the Srimad Bhagavatam purports, he's not just assuming that anyone who's reading Bhagavatam has already, faithfully and with all determination said, okay, no, I am surrendering to Krishna. So he still addresses these Bhagavad Gita level doubts in the purports of Srimad Bhagavatam. So no matter what level we're on, we can read Srila Prabhupada's books and we can get a lot out of it. But if we understand the language of the Vedas, the way Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained to Srila Sanatana Goswami, then we can appreciate to a much greater depth what Srila Prabhupada is presenting. So that's the introduction. Just a quick note about this book. Sri Caitanya Siksamrita, this study guide is mostly, so let's say about 90%, it's Bhanu Maharaj's translation and commentary to the book. There are a few footnotes that we have added. They'll have an asterisk. And there are also a few instances where we'll have something in the square brackets that we also added, where, say, for example, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is referring to a list. There's 3 of these things. And within those 3, the first one has 2 subsections. And within those 2, it has 3 more subsections. So sometimes we get confused of where we were. So sometimes in brackets, I'll just remind the readers what those subsections are so we don't have to go back and, because sometimes they're a few pages back. So, but mostly this is Bhanu Maharaj's translation and commentary, aside from those instances. Okay. And we added the table of contents also. There was none. Okay. So, are there any questions so far about that? Just the introduction? Because that's a lot. No? Okay. So we can start. So the table of contents. This book has 6 chapters. The first chapter is Bhakti. Right? So there's an assessment of Dharma, the primary and the secondary Dharmas. Then there's the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Then there are the 7 topics of Sambandha, right? Because Sambandha is actually subdivided. And those are Krishna Shakti, his rasa. Then there's the jiva, the topic of the jiva has 3. There's the jiva itself, the nitya bada, and then the nitya mukta. And then the final of the 7 topics of Sambandha is Achintya Bheda Bheda. Then in part 6 of chapter 1, we're going to talk about Abhideya, which is the process, that's Bhakti, the process of Bhakti Yoga. And then part 7 is Prayojana. So in chapter 1, we're going through Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. And then Sambandha is going in these 7 sections. Then chapter 2 is talking about the secondary rules. So in the first part of chapter 1, we're talking about the assessment of Dharma, the primary and the secondary. So chapter 2 is dedicated to those secondary things, right? So first we have to classify the secondary rules. Then we talk about punya karma, that's pious activities. Then we talk about qualification for work and varnas, what we're meant to do according to our conditioning. Then ashram and daily duties. Chapter 3 is Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. So there are 2 types of bhakti. There's Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, which is where we have to understand what the rules and the regulations are of bhakti in order to make spiritual advancement. So right now, we're in the material world. We have a conditioned nature here. We don't want, really, to surrender to Krishna. We want the world to revolve around us. I want to be in control of the things that I have. Maybe not a lot. Maybe I don't want to control the whole world. But what I do have, I want control over, and I want to enjoy it. I don't want to be miserable, and I don't want to be out of control, right? And if we have this mentality to control and enjoy, which we all have here in the material world, then that means we're spontaneously attached to material nature, right? We're not spontaneously attached to Krishna. But if at least we have good enough sense to know that I shouldn't be spontaneously attached to matter, that I should actually transfer my attachment to Krishna, because it's kind of ludicrous to think that I can actually control and enjoy anything. I can't even control my body, right? I want to stay up all day and all night, but I can't. I have to sleep sometimes. I don't even control my heart pumping my blood. That's something else that's doing that. If that stopped, if my breath stopped, all of this would go away. So we are not really in control. And when we try to, it's very easy to see that we're not, right? So at least in theory, we understand, okay, if Krishna is the source of everything, right, including us, he's the source of us as well, then instead of living our lives as if I'm the center, we should live our lives as knowing that Krishna is the center, right? But since we're not on that spontaneous platform yet, we have to follow a process, right? So first we have some faith, right? We have some faith that, okay, I'm not the controller, the enjoyer, and I have faith that there is a God, right? And that he is the controller and the enjoyer. Then, when that faith increases a bit, we start seeking out others who have this same idea, right? I want to know more about it. I can't figure it out on my own. So I'm going to start talking to other people who are on the same path. That's called sadhu sangha. So we start talking to others about this. Then, as our faith increases more as a result of conversing with others who are also on this path, then we start making some adjustments to our lives. We start accepting some things that are prescribed in the Shastras, right? Certain activities, certain behaviors, right? So we start adding things to our lives that are going to enhance it, right? Then after we do that, our faith still increases more. Our desire to associate with devotees increases more. And we start adding more and more favorable things to our process of bhakti. Then we start noticing that not only do we have to add these favorable things, but there are also some things that we're doing that are holding us back, some negative things. And those, of course, we have to either give up, or we have to understand how they can actually be used properly in Krishna service. We don't necessarily have to give everything up. We have to give up the attachment to it, the idea that this is here to serve me, to please me, right? Then, the next stage as we practice a little bit further is we become steady, right? So that means instead of us tending to do more our conditioned nature to enjoy materially, we're tending more to do things as recommended in the Shastra, as advised by the sadhus, like that. So we become steady. So more than 50% of the time, we're trying to live our lives based on what the process is telling us. We're trying to accept the things that are favorable, reject the things that are not, trying to keep our association tight, and we're trying to increase our faith. Then, after a while, it stops becoming a chore, and we actually start liking it, right? So that's a taste. We get a taste for it. We want it now. It's not that we know that it's a good idea, so we're doing it. It's like, oh no, I actually like this. This is what I want to do, right? So that comes. As that increases, that just appreciation becomes an attachment, right? So the difference between taste and attachment. Taste is something I want to do. Attachment is something I need to do, right? You try to take something away from me that I'm attached to, then there's going to be a problem. No, I need that. It's not that I want that, I need that, right? So then attachment's there. When that further cultivates, then we start getting the bud of love of Godhead. And that further cultivates. And so the reason why I bring this up is because we're talking about Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti and Raganuga. Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti was the first very big section of what I just explained. And if we're down on the lower levels, we need Sadhana Bhakti. There's no question of one day our spontaneous attraction to material nature all of a sudden converting to our spontaneous attraction to Krishna if we're not educating ourselves on what actually does that look like, spontaneous attraction to Krishna, right? Because as we said before, if we don't know the relationship, we don't know the sambandha, who I am, who Krishna is, and what the relationship is, then even if I'm always trying to remember Krishna, I may be doing that unfavorably, like Kamsa or Shishupal, right? And so This is the reason why it's very important for us to understand this process of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, and not to just imagine that one day we're just going to become Raganuga Bhaktas, the spontaneous lovers of Krishna. That said, the next section is Raganuga Bhakti, because we also don't want to ignore that. That's a very important step. It's not a step we're on yet, it's a step that we have to get to, but we also have to understand it, because if we don't understand it, then we may be afraid to let go of the lower steps, which is also something that's dangerous that we don't want to do. We learned this lesson, by the way, from, among others, from Bhishma Dev when he's on his deathbed in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, Raganuga Bhakti. Then Bhava, which is the second to the last stage I was just mentioning. We talk about the qualities of Bhava, knowledge and Rati. And then the last chapter is about Prema, right? So all of these things we have to know, we have to understand. But before we get to the good stuff, we have to understand how we get to the good stuff, right? Again, it's important for us to know what the goal is, the prayojana. It's important for us to understand the relationship. And we especially need to know what the process is. Once we have established those things, we need to know, okay, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? So that's the table of contents. So chapter 1, part 1. Obeisances to their lordships, Radha and Krishna. There are countless philosophies, but although attempting to reach the truth, they are all incomplete and mutually conflicting, being generated from illusory premises. These philosophies find their perfection in Krishna Bhakti. I, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, begin this book by offering my respects to Sri Krishna Chaitanya, the bestower of Krishna Bhakti. So this is actually worth commenting on. There are so many philosophies, so many ideas of how life should be going. In fact, if you ask 1 million people how life should be going, you will get 1 million different varieties of answers. Some of them will be similar. Even if you ask 1 million theists, people who believe in God, you'll probably get 1 million different answers, right? There are so many different philosophies because there are so many different material desires, right? There are 3 modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And we have a very unique, each of us has a very unique mixture of those 3 covering us. So we have different natural proclivities, desires, and tendencies. And according to those desires, our philosophy in life is going to differ, right? So someone who is a full-time chef, it's all about food, right? It's all about food. It's always going to revolve around that. And they can relate everything to food, right? Whatever someone's passion is, they can relate, life revolves around that, right? Comment.
Music, for example.
Music, for example. Yes, that's another one. So when I was a teenager, I was a skateboarder. And all my friends, it was just like eat, sleep, drink, skateboard. Like when we're eating off of our skateboard in the parking lot of where the best spot is, a box of crackers and some spray on cheese. And we're talking about tricks. That's all we did. That was it. That was life. We're dreaming about tricks. We're drawing plans for these new ramps with all these, that's all it was. That's what life revolves around. So different people come up with different philosophies based on their desires, based on their moral beliefs, right? Yes?
Yeah, just in confirming what you're saying, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that in 2nd chapter, because they talks about the Veda Bhagavatas, the so-called followers of the Vedas, and he says because they are attached to sense enjoyment, therefore they say that there is nothing higher than them. So it goes this
Yes.
way. It's not that they investigated objectively reality,
No.
they came to the conclusion. No, it's other way around. They have these attachments, and therefore they came up with
And they model their
theory.
philosophy behind it.
And also some Western philosophers, they understood this. They said that, one of them said that our passions, becomes the axioms of our philosophy.
Mm.
And another guy he said that every ideology, or maybe it was the same guy, anyway, every ideology is a unconscious and involunteer self-diagnosis of a disease that you have.
Yes.
Because it shows your ignorance about the reality, in fact.
Thank you.
Very.
Yes, very good addition. So the idea is we base our philosophy on what we know, what we have experience of, right? And when I was mentioning Panchanga Nyaya earlier, the way Srila Prabhupada presents all of his logic, the basis of Panchanga Nyaya is you always start with what Krishna is saying, right? You don't start with where you're coming from and then try to figure out what's life all about. You start with what's actually real, and then you figure out how to mold your life to fit that, right? And so unfortunately, what we have a tendency to do, we conditioned souls, even when we come, even when we are introduced to the process of bhakti. I remember, let's see, 95 maybe, we got a laptop. It was actually Hridayananda Maharaj's old laptop where he translated the Mahabharata. Yeah. So somehow this laptop was handed down through several devotees, and it ended up on my desk. And it didn't have battery life at all. You had to plug it in for it to work. But it had Veda base on it, folio, right? And I remember when we got that, that was just like the best toy we could ever have. Like we could look up anything that Srila Prabhupada ever said. Let's see how many times Srila Prabhupada said, this or that, So we're just having a blast with it. What I found out after a while is what we conditioned souls have a tendency to do is we have an idea of something. We have our mind made up on it. We're convinced of it thoroughly, right? But since we're involved in this Krishna consciousness movement, of course we want to give scriptural quotes that give support to what our attachment is actually saying. And so we approach Shastra in that way. We look for something to prove that we're right? And it's unfortunate that we do that. Because if we actually study Shastra, we will find that there are things that seem, at the time, contradictory. But they're not. And the way to understand how they're not contradictory is actually to study the Shastra. To let go of this idea that, no, I'm the center. Everything that I've experienced is reliable. Anything anybody else experienced, no. Whatever, I'm not under illusion. You were under illusion. So my philosophy is perfect and yours is imperfect. This is our tendency. But the beauty of our philosophy, and I mean the actual philosophy, I don't just mean, people dressing in a certain way or reading a certain type of book. I mean actual followers of our philosophy understand that it all comes down to Krishna's instructions in the Shastra. It doesn't matter what we feel, right? And Krishna explained this to Arjuna, right, in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Arjuna, first he was talking about his feelings. This doesn't feel right. That's my family. They're respectable, right? And then when feelings were thrown out, don't worry about feelings. Okay, well now I'm going to quote Shastra. Because according to Shastra, if you do this, then this happens, and that's bad, right? So better I do this, right? So at every angle possible, Arjuna was expressing his doubts based on feelings, based on Shastra, based on anything he could come up with. And Krishna explained it to him, right? And so we have to get used to this idea that we're not perfect. Our experiences are imperfect. And that if we truly want to know the truth, we have to approach it properly. So in Bhagavad Gita 434, is it 434? Tadvidi Pranipatena? It tells us how to get this knowledge. So first we find someone who has seen the truth, tattva darshana. It doesn't mean they know the truth in theory. It means they've actually seen it. And since they have seen it, since they have experienced it, they can also give it to us. But we don't just walk in and say, hey, Guru, give me the truth. I got some rupees here. Come on. Give me your best truth. Right? No, it tells us how. How do we approach the spiritual master? Who wants to say it? With our hands like this. That's the key.
Humbly.
Humbly. Someone said submissively. So inquire from him submissively and render service unto him, because there should be some sort of reciprocation. The submissive inquiry. So first of all, the submissive is the very important part of that. I know someone who, while translating that verse, was trying to take that out because the word submissive, it sounds negative, right? Usually when we're talking in the material, when we're talking about somebody submitting, that means they're acknowledging some defeat that they really don't want to. And what it usually means in the material world is once you submit to someone, they exploit you, right? Krishna, fortunately, doesn't exploit us when we submit to him. So submission is not a bad word, even though it has bad connotations in our mind. We have negative experiences of it. But it's not a negative thing. It's actually quite a beautiful thing. So the submissive part's important. Benjamin Franklin, I don't know if he was the first one to say it, but he said the duty of every responsible citizen is to question authority, right? So there are others, especially punk rock bands in the 70s and 80s, who took part of that quote, question authority, and they made that their anthem, their mantra. You should question authority. But they were trying to say that you should question whether they actually have an authority over you or not. That was their questioning of authority, right? As it turns out, the so-called authorities that they were questioning weren't really authorities, because authority means that you're authorized, you actually have proper knowledge. And the so-called authorities that they were questioning, they weren't authorized anyway, so they were right to be punk about it and reject their so-called authority. But when we say inquire from a spiritual master, we don't mean to question authority in that way. We mean that you question him in a submissive way, because I understand you've seen the truth. I also want to see the truth. So now I'm inquiring submissively. And as a reciprocation to that, since you're giving me something that's more valuable than anything that I have, I'm going to try to render some service to you, to repay that, right? And so this is how Krishna explains to Arjuna the way to accept, the way to receive knowledge, right? So it has to be coming from Krishna, from an authorized path, parampara, unbroken chain of disciplic succession. And that's how we can reach the truth. That's the only way to reach the truth. Others are incomplete and mutually conflicting, right? So last year we were going through, in the one study guide, we got a lot of quotes from Suhotra Maharaj's book that was talking about deism and all these different philosophies that came up, like Christian sub-branches, right? Christianity has so many different sub-branches where a person who was the head of a church at one point saw that, oh, actually, this point is very important. This point that's in the Bible, super important. And so I'm going to focus on that, right? And so all these different branches on all these different points, they're all legitimate points. Most of them started that way anyway. But instead of seeing the whole picture, they're focusing on one specific aspect. Then over time, instead of taking legitimate points, they were taking illegitimate points. What?
Secondary.
Secondary. Good, thank you. They were starting to... There's this expression we have in English, I don't know if you have it, where you say you have your thumb on the pulse of society. It means you're aware of what society's needs are. So some people in the church, after a while, thought, instead of branching off into these different things based on what the Bible's saying, let's actually just find out what the people want and give it to them, because then it'll be more popular, right? We can get more people into our church if we find out what is it that they want, what is it that they, what parts of the philosophy are they having trouble grasping, and you just throw that out. We don't talk about that anymore, right? Let's just talk about what we want, right? And Buddha actually did this. Lord Buddha, an incarnation of Krishna, right? He actually did this. He said, okay, these people aren't going to follow the Vedas, but at least let's get them to a point where they're not being jerks, right? Let's teach them some manners, at least. and a whole philosophy came about, right? And so from time to time, these philosophies exist. And a lot of them are actually started by devotees, right? With good intentions, trying to bridge the gap between one culture and another, right? And that's a good thing to do if we actually bridge the gap. But if we find that we've crossed the bridge and then burned it, or built a house on the other side and, just invited people there instead of across the bridge, then that's not the way the bridge is meant to work. It's supposed to bring people on this side, not on the other side. So, many of these philosophies, countless, infinite amounts of philosophies exist, but they're mutually conflicting because they're generated from illusory premises. So anytime we're trying to make a philosophy based on our experience and not based on what the Shastra is actually telling us, it's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to lead to... So it's like, we know who we are, we know Krishna, we have the map, but we're not going to follow it because that road, I don't really have... I think I could probably think of a better road. I could probably make a better road. There's like, just the direct path, okay, well, maybe if there's a cliff, we'll just blow a hole through the mountain. We come up with these ideas, and we think that they're superior to Krishna's, right? We find this in our prayers when we pray to Krishna, right? When I was very young, I used to pray to God for specific presents for Christmas. Hey, Jesus, it's your birthday, but, I really want the new Transformer, right? These are the things we prayed for when we were kids. At
least you prayed.
At least I prayed, right?
I do.
Pandavaji did not pray for toys. Then we start realizing, well, that's a silly thing to ask God for. And then we start asking God, hey, can you, the weather's pretty bad right now and people are dying because of it. Can you put an end to that? Can you stop that? We start praying for world peace, right? Not understanding that there's a reason the weather's bad and people are dying, right? When we actually get to understand the true relationship between who we are and who Krishna is, then we stop seeing things through our own field of vision. We start seeing things through Krishna's field of vision. We start understanding, this material world is full of a bunch of rebellious people who probably deserve worse than what they're getting, right? And instead of trying to counteract some of those material difficulties through material means, we can actually counteract all material difficulties by engaging in spirituality properly. Not by our own idea of what philosophy should be, but what the actual process is, right? And so first, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's offering his respects to Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, because Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, without any bit of uncertainty or unclarity, presents this to Srila Sanatana Goswami. And he presented it to him because he knew, okay, Srila Sanatana Goswami, he's also now going to basically explain how Vaishnavas should behave, right? Vaishnava etiquette. And so first Lord Chaitanya gave him the outline of what he should write about, and then Srila Sanatana Goswami followed that. So we have in Sri Caitanya Charitamrita that conversation, so we know how we're meant to behave. And in those chapters, there's an entire chapter dedicated to Sambandha, and we're talking chapters that are hundreds and hundreds of verses. Not just sometimes in Gita they're 30, I think one's 18, not in Gita but Bhagavatam, there's one with 12 verses. There's some chapters that are very short. Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's 500 and I think that's not even the biggest chapter. Many, many verses. So these chapters, chock full of information, completely dedicated to Sambandha, then another chapter for Abhideya, another chapter for Prayojana, right? And the chapter before that, the end of it, explains how we need to understand Shastra in this way. So this book is Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's gift to us, that we don't necessarily have to study that whole thing when we're not really ready to understand the language of it. We can understand the language of it here. we can get a glimpse of it, we can get a taste of it, and then hopefully we get an attachment to it, right? Taste evolves to attachment. So we will continue. I'm being summoned back. There are three objects in this universe: matter, conscious entities, and the Lord. And there's a footnote there. This is a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 11th chapter, verse 6. By chance, two birds have made a nest together in the same tree. The two birds are friends and are of a similar nature. One of them, however, is eating the fruits of the tree, whereas the other, who does not eat the fruits, is in a superior position due to his potency. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur continues, matter is that substance without volition. That means faculty of will. It doesn't have the will to do anything. For example, earth, rock, water, fire, air, ether, house, forest, grain, cloth, or a body. Matter. No faculty of will. Then, next, humans, animals, insects, and reptiles are conscious entities, as they have the power to discern and desire, right? So they do have the faculty of will. Of these, so of the conscious entities, humanity has the greater power of discernment. For this reason, some people call mankind the master of all living and non-living entities, which is actually a problem for us, because anytime we think we're the master, it's an issue, right? That means we don't understand the proper sambandha. But we do think in this way. Before I read that footnote, really quick story. So there are these astronomers that they do research of what's going on these different planets, right? How much oxygen is there? How much water is there? Can it support life, right?
As we know.
And of course, yeah, they define life as human life, right? Is it the right temperature for us? Is it the right amount of oxygen and nitrogen, all these different things that we require? And they come to the conclusion that since these planets can't suit our needs, they must be uninhabited. Nothing lives there, right? These same idiotic scientists, many of them live right near the ocean, which has many, many different living entities that are living in there, and we can't. But they don't have this faculty of understanding that, well, if it's possible for other beings that are made for a certain environment, well, then it's certainly possible that on these other planets there are living entities that have bodies that are suitable to that environment. They don't think in these terms. They think only in self-centric terms. Humans can't exist there, there's no life there, right? If you ask them, is there life in the ocean? They'd probably go, well, it's a different kind of life. It's, not the same, But they'll also try to tell you that we evolved from the ones that were in the ocean. Anyway, these guys don't make much sense. Yes?
When you finish.
Go ahead. I was first.
I just saw here, like when the entities with consciousness are described, but Thakur is saying humans, animals, insects, reptiles, so all these are living entities.
Yes.
Because some philosophies are saying, no, only the humans, they have
That's true.
consciousness, and animals, they don't have. That's why we can kill them and they won't feel anything.
That's true, they do say that. We go one step further and we realize that even fruits and vegetables and trees, there's a soul there. And so who knows the verse in Bhagavad Gita that explains why it's not sinful to eat not vegetables, but certain vegetables under certain circumstances.
Leaves?
Huh? That's a good verse. It's close to that verse. Starts with, huh?
Patra.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Not the one. It starts with Yajna. Muchante sarvakila visar, bunjate te tvagam papa, ye pachantyat makaranat. So the devotees, they're released from all kinds of sins. Why? Because Yajna Shishtas, they eat food which is first offered in sacrifice. Not because they only eat vegetables. It doesn't say that. We're not actually vegetarians, we're Krishnatarians. It's not that we eat vegetables. We eat only things that are offered to Krishna. Krishna just so happens to not accept meat. Patram pushpam palam toyam. That's the one that you were saying. And whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever, that's the one you were saying. So all of these things are important to understand. If we stop at vegetarianism, if we're not offering our food, we're actually still engaging in sin, right? What takes it away is offering it first in sacrifice, right? And then the rest of that verse, others who eat food for sense enjoyment, they just want to satisfy their belly or their tongue, they like the flavor of it, verily eat only sin. So it's not that prasadam doesn't taste nice, it's not that our tongues don't quite enjoy it, it's that our consciousness should be more in satisfying Krishna and then benefiting from the results of that, and not, well, this is what I want to eat, so this is what I'm going to offer to Krishna. That's how our process evolves. So again, sambandha. If we understand what the relationship is, when we first come to Krishna consciousness, that's exactly what we do. We figure out, all right, what's at least not off limits that I like, right? Pizza, okay. I'm going to order a pizza, I'm going to Shri Vishnu it, and I'm going to eat it, right? Then, maybe after a while, I start thinking, if this is prepared by a non-devotee, Krishna would probably appreciate it more if maybe at least an aspiring devotee made the pizza. We're still on pizza, don't worry. We didn't get rid of the pizza yet. So we start thinking, okay, now I'm just gonna make it, right? That's better, right? So we start making the pizza. Then we start thinking, well, the quality of ingredients, I could probably do better, right? The tomatoes I'm getting, they're from the supermarket, they got pesticides on them, and I could probably grow some tomatoes to make the sauce. That would be even better. Because then while I'm cultivating the ground, I can meditate on Krishna. I can meditate on how within every tomato there are so many different seeds, and from each seed comes a whole new plant which gives a whole bunch of other tomatoes. I can meditate on the fact that Krishna has put all of that in this tiny seed while I'm planting it and cultivating and watching it grow. I can also meditate on how the bhakti, the creeper of bhakti, the bhakti lata creeper, how that also needs to be carefully maintained. When I'm taking off the weeds that are near it, that are choking out the roots of what I actually want to grow, the tomatoes, I can meditate on, this is like removing the anarthas, the unwanted things that I have in my heart that are keeping me from blossoming in Krishna consciousness. The whole process, I can be thinking of Krishna from putting the seed in the ground, to harvesting it, to cutting it up, to cooking it, to making it into the sauce to put on the pizza, right? And then maybe, after a while, I'll think, does Krishna like pizza? And maybe I'll find out the things that Krishna does like, and maybe he does like pizza. He likes dairy. There's dairy on pizza. But there's specific types of milk preparations that Krishna specifically likes, right? And so maybe we'll start making some of those. And maybe we're intolerant to those particular foods, but we can still make them for Krishna. Because when I have a friend over that I haven't seen in a long time, I want to make their favorite meal, even if I don't eat it. Right? That's the more important thing because of the relationship, right? So if we understand the relationship, sambandha, good, then we can actually thrive in that relationship, right? And so we'll see that as we start understanding this conversation between Lord Chaitanya and Srila Sanatana Goswami, we'll start seeing where our tendencies lie. Do our tendencies lie more in a self-centric way or more in a Krishna-centric way? And it's going to give us the abhideya, the process to get from where we are to where we want to be. So this book is very important. I'm glad that we read 4 sentences of it. It is now 5:30. We're going to stop here. I have gifts for you all. It's the same gift that I give every first day of school. So these are called book darts. I learned about these from Srila Jayadvaita Maharaj. Yeah. It's not only a bookmark, it marks the specific place where you leave off on a certain page. Do you need two for each study guide? Everybody can, I'm going to take one here. Take and pass around.
One from 2022.
You still have one from then? Great. So you can mark this spot where you're at, and you can take more than just for the study guides if you want, like whatever book you're reading. They're really handy. They're amazing.
Yeah.
Jai Dvaita Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Okay, so we'll stop here. Om Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai.